Today is a very political day. We also have a new member Sunday. We're gonna digest the Bragas into our community. That's not the right word. That's physical. I don't know. We're gonna invite. We're gonna welcome. We're gonna bring them in. So today is a political service. It's sort of preparing for Memorial Day. I won't be here then. And we have this. We UUs are a weird bunch in the sense that we hold this deep commitment to tolerance, right? Freedom, and we have a desire not to offend anyone, regardless of their political persuasion. And on the other hand, we have a deep commitment to speaking out, acting out, and talking about our core values. And then over cereal at home, reading the paper and meetings, we bemoan ourselves for being too complacent as individuals in a church. It's a tough balance to be a UU. You have to be an activist and sensitive. Ironically, that is who we are, and that is the calling we have. And it's always a balance of respecting the present, holding that deep-seated commitment to the liberty that people can believe what they want, right? Validating their own experiences. That's how we change. And there's no real firm way that we balance out that desire to speak our truth and honor that diversity. It's just inevitably going to be clumsy. So today is a version of that clumsiness where we honor Memorial Day headed our way and the sacrifice that it takes to be a soldier and to defend the country and to do all those noble things, and then to just step back and bemoan the fact that people lose their lives over the defense of their nations and other reasons, and the cost of all of that. And today we're going to honor that split at the time of year that it starts to get nice. What a weird combination of things. And that's what we do today. Please join me in the chalice lighting words printed in our order of service here from William Schultz, former UUA president. Also was the president of Amnesty International for a period of time. This is the mission of our faith: to teach the fragile art of hospitality, to revere both the critical and the generous heart, to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, and to witness to all that we must hold the whole world in our hands.
Jim doesn't. Let's sing out our 10th song. Thank you guys for being here. Great.
Peace, gonna peace, let the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you go. Peace, gonna peace, let the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere
Every Memorial Day, or preparing for Memorial Day, I deliver this prayer. It's estimated that in the last century, or since the first century, 149 million people have died in wars. 149 million people have died in wars. It's estimated that in the last century alone, accounting for about 100 million deaths. In our Civil War, 526,332 American soldiers died. In World War I, 116,516 American soldiers died. World War II, 405,399 American soldiers died. The total soldiers killed in the Great Second World War, the Great War as we call it, 35 million. In the Korean War, there were 36,913 American soldiers killed. In Vietnam, there were 58,177,000 American soldiers. Total dead from all sides of what was at that point and still remains called a strategic conflict, some 3,434,000 people, most of them invisible, indigenous, local people that we choose not to count on our scales of war. On the agenda of every church, and I would encourage you to take this into the silence, should be an ongoing, never-ending commitment to halt the licensed savagery of warfare. To see to it that war, if not completely eliminated, is at least morally crippled to the degree that slavery is, cannibalism, human sacrifice, and apartheid are. That is my prayer, and will be every Memorial Day. Let's take that to a moment of silence. Somber day, right? I mean, with some joy in it too. In Flanders Field, sort of a poem a little bit lost to my generation in South, but for the generation above, a very powerful poem. It was written by John McCrae, who was written in 1915. During the First World War, he was a Canadian officer. He was also a surgeon, and it helped popularize the red poppy as a symbol of remembrance. You'll see little red poppies on Veterans Day, Memorial Day. Here's his poem. In Flanders fields, the poppies blow. Between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amidst the guns below. We are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Field. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Field. We've added a sermon anthem here called Faith in the Larger Liberty.
Faith of the nature, source of the light expanding, Lord, the church that is to be, of bondage not withstanding, Faith of the free, by thee we live, by all that give us, and shall give thy commanded. Years of faith in every far seeing self-denying. In a new heritage, my Northern creed defying. Faith of the free, enlightened costly heritage we claim, they living out their dying. Faith for the people everywhere, whatever their oppression, fair, living the faith's confession, faith of the free, whatever applied, the Lord our me, to thy light shall be a blessed possession.
Thank you. Next weekend, we will honor our lost soldiers as we mark their deaths and hold their thoughts and tributes. If my rough calculations are right, there were about 1 million American citizens from the start of our country who lost their lives in war. That accounting notably does not include the Native Americans who died defending their lands. For most of us who would think of us as us, they're not on the lists, right? Nor does that figure in the way that we account for it, account the many non-citizen combatants of people who were formerly enslaved. We don't count that either. Just wanted to make that clear. They weren't citizens, even though many of the Native African Americans served in the military. That's a whole different worthy sermon of its own. I want to honor that and just put that aside for a minute. I probably don't need to remind anybody we get this, and it's so instinctively biological that it's true, that it takes great courage and loyalty to put oneself in harm's way for one's country or tribe or people. Whether the death is terrifying and quick or it's slow and painful from some of the chemicals military people get in war or even just serving in the military, that cost and the risk of that must be honored. Watching people lose their only life that we know we're given, it's almost unfathomable to someone of my level of privilege to think that people actually do this. Given the twisted way the world has and is presently structured, we simply also don't have the privilege of taking our freedom for granted, and we should never forget that. That's true. As many churches will this weekend, I want to start this service with an earnest bow to those who have given their lives in service of our country and our freedom, my freedom, the only life they have. I both deeply respect that they've done this and at the same time despise the structures and the systems that have driven them to have to do this. The image I have in my mind, I don't know what yours is if you ever think about being a soldier, but I just think about soldiers who jump out of perfectly good planes in the middle of the night to float down into areas where in the pitch black they face enemy gunfire. Let's take a moment of silence for just what it takes to do that. In Flanders Field's poem, McCrae closes his famous poem by saying that speaking for those who've died in battle, those people ask us to pick up the torch from our failing hands and take up our quarrel with the foe. And then poetically urges that those of us still living who fail to do so break faith with those who've died. The last stanzas of that poem begs an interesting question. Do those who are in the middle of dying from battle generally feel more loyalty to the cause or the war they died in? Or, as they lay dying, do they often curse the war for taking their life and wish they were never part of it in the first place? That's a powerful question of which I'm sure there are people on both sides of that answer. As disparate as they are, inevitably people have both those experiences. Maybe some dying soldiers even have both. I want you to imagine yourself dying on a battlefield or in some makeshift war hospital. Would you wish, as you were laying there dying at the hand of others, wish to hand the battle to those who could fight on? Or do you think that while you were watching your own life drain from you, that the futility of that experience of war would more wash over you? Many churches would never ask that question. They wouldn't think it was appropriate, disrespectful. Thankfully, none of us sitting in this room are likely to be faced with that choice. For good or ill, both of us are too old or too privileged to be faced with that challenge. Thank God for that. Thank God we're all old enough to not have to face that. And although we don't experience it that way, the we, you, me are probably more active participants in the violence of war than we even like to think we are. And that is because our nation is the chief agent of militarizing the world. Hardly the only one, but we are the chief one. Without ever putting on a uniform or holding a gun, we simply, as citizens of the United States, are an active part of the violence of this world. If you have your little sheets, you can cheat ahead. There's a little picture. I have a couple pictures in there. The last details I was able to find in 2019, I discovered that the United States has 800 military installations around the world, more than 800. Take that in. The first map you're looking at, number one, we have military bases, the larger stars indicating the countries that have at least 50 US bases in them. The second map here accounts for where and to what extent Sarah's holding them up for the people at home. Thank you, Sarah. The second map accounts for where and to what extent we've performed military actions from 2018 only to 2020, a 2-year period. If you look at it, the yellow, as it says, are the places where we have trained counter-terrorist forces within a country. Take a look at that. The green dots are places where we have performed military training operations. The orange dots actually identify the place where we have had troops on the ground and engaged with people we call terrorists. And the red are places where we performed either air or drone strikes. That, scientifically speaking, is a lot. Our actions overseas buy us a lot of power. They help our corporations. They no doubt prevent some terrorist attacks, but at the same time, they create some of the dissent that fuels them. All at once, everything at once. Life is complex. The proportions of each as to what good or ill it does is impossible to really determine. This is largely unexamined by an American public who feels bad making the military feel, well, bad. What would it take for Americans to care a little bit more about our global military reach? I thought to myself. And I was thinking of memes or sort of things that happen that would drag our attention. The very nature of the Squid Games as a competitive thing, popular a couple of years ago, led me to wonder what might draw our attention to the sprawling nature and scope of our military reach. And I just like the idea of a squid captured my attention. What if something like, we like to gamble, there's now a whole bunch of online apps, right? Maybe something like where Americans could wager on whether Kim Kardashian gets married again before our nation commits, say, 100 drone strikes, might drag our Taylor Swift focused attention at light matters onto a serious matter. Maybe the idea of a public lottery based on military actions and celebrity behavior would be a gutter experience enough for we as a people to need to put ourselves in the moral conversation about the scope and size of our military. In the spirit of trying to break the spell of not only respecting the military, I've dreamed up an advertisement, a couple of them, that might cause some controversy, but remove our blinders for the sake of our military. I want you to imagine there's two high-ranking military officials, accountant types, sitting at a desk, looking like bookkeepers. There's a pile of accounting books and software and computer screens are up. Maybe there's a laptop or two open. Voice one says, okay, so far the figures look about right. We have been in the war on terror for just over 20 years, and we've lost more than 7,000 of our soldiers. Voice two, when we run the numbers, he's running the numbers. That means that for a 21-year campaign, about once a day, more than one of our soldiers was sacrificed. The other voice says, that means that if each state were to have supplied an equal number of soldiers, which of course they don't, that means that each state would have offered up 7 of their young, often men, not always, to each campaign each year. However, the voice two says, as hard as we want to look at those numbers, when we look at the lives lost in World War II, he says, Korea and Vietnam, the war on terror is significantly under the estimations of what we determine the public can stomach. Another voice says, especially if we're going to limit the media access to caskets coming home, as we did in Iraq. Voice two, how about injuries? How are we doing on injuries? Well, for that 21-year operation, it's not too far from a significant injury about every 2 hours to an American soldier. Voice two says, again, affordable to the American public conscience. But remember, the voice one says, the injured in this war are generally worse than the other war injured. More of our troops survive now than before, which is great, but expensive. Voice two says, how much will that cost us financially? They start scratching out some numbers. When we figure in the estimated future costs of medical care and disability payments, well, the only appropriate word is wow. A towering 2.2 trillion of estimated financial total accounts for the future care has already been set aside for military veterans. That's about a quarter of the cost of our military expenses over the last 20 years in the war of terror. The other voice says, wow. When we add in the cost of rebuilding our depleted military to those deaths, suffering and quite practically the expense of caring for our disabled soldiers, and for the Iraq war alone, we're talking more than $3 trillion for that war in Iraq alone. Something's going to have to be done. Voice one says, we'll cut benefits. Oh yeah, we will do that, voice two says. We've shifted some of the costs to nonprofit charitable causes already. Voice one, this is all compounded, but the real problem we face is that when you figure out the debt accumulated from our war on terror, you start talking in figures that move at the monetary speed of light. True enough, the other voice says. Our expenses from the early part of our campaign have dropped, but at the start of the Iraq war in the early 2000s, we as a nation were spending about $240 million a day. After scratching and tapping on a piece of paper, that means that for the first quarter of the decade, nationally, our spending broke down into just $10 million an hour. Wow. Real quickly, it gets to the place that just like the number of the stars in a sky, your eyes just glaze over. Your mind can't grasp it, he says. That's what we're banking on, the other one says. You know, a million here, a billion there, and pretty soon people's minds just go blank. Don't be too disheartened, though, the other one says. Remember, those numbers will only be divided, not only be divided among the 320 million citizens of the United States, but spread out over future generations. Well, if that's the case, the other one says, we can afford that. Screen fades to black. Then we hear the narrator speak in this advertisement I've created. You wouldn't hand your checkbook over to anyone and let them write your checks. You wouldn't let anyone vote for you. You would certainly want to know who had your car keys and how well they were driving. To any longer let our government play world cop in our name is not unlike not canceling a stolen credit card. Illegal. No one would present that on their television station at all, ever, right? You'd be banned for telling that truth. I want you to remember that. Never on a major network or a cable station could you present a story like that. Think about the next time you see a military advertisement with lean young men climbing on some sandstone thing or being masked by some imaginary armor like Iron Man, which we do. Think about the fact that a private person or entity could not get anything like that printed in a major newspaper, and it means that we have no real open conversation about war. I'm not here to suggest that the answers are simple, that we should give up the army, that presuming Osama bin Laden was not worthwhile, or that Saddam Hussein was a good leader. They're dangerous terrorists and thugs in the world. I'm just asking us all to consider that America is one of them too. America spends as much on its military as do the next 9 countries combined. What I'm asking you to add up to the way that you look at yourself morally is the very simple fact that there are people and times when inevitably bad actors completely need to be constrained. True. No easy answers here. But I'm also asking you to consider how it feels to be a passive contributor to the world's largest military empire. All options are imperfect. We now have a steady track record of being involved with conflicts that kill so many, cost so much, and so often fail. It demands some honest reflection, doesn't it? I have an idea to test the conviction of those that lobby the hardest for a big war budget. What if the military contractors that make up 50% of the military budget and growing only got paid when they successfully completed the nation-building efforts that we pay them so handsomely to do? What if, like an investor in any kind of capital venture they had to raise their own capital to fund what the wars that are presently prescribed for their performance with your tax dollars? Would the private enterprises that we fund take the economic risk for the services and results we pay them to perform? And if not, why not? Do they know it doesn't work too? Let's push the idea even a little bit further. What if the military itself was only paid for the successful completion of a task? That would be unthinkable, right? Why? Because we're afraid to say hard things about the most courageous and brave in our country, which our soldiers are? Or that we like playing world cop? Or maybe because we're in part afraid of admitting that we are just one nation among many. Given the very primitive measure of success that we should hold ourselves being, that we should leave the place better than we arrived at it. Classic camping. We're going to go camping in the middle of July. When has the last time that's happened? Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam. In 1961, not Gandhi or MLK or Abbie Hoffman, but General Dwight D. Eisenhower said in his farewell speech as the President of the United States, acknowledging and even while promoting the need for a large established military, also said, and I quote, "But in the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex." After King won the Nobel Peace Prize and had been given been the chief leader in a national effort to get the Civil and Voting Rights Act passed, he moved into a Chicago tenement and started to turn his attention towards the economic issues that affected the poor, and in that spirit began to speak out against the war. It took him that long. He opposed on the grounds that a war on the poor overseas was in part a war on the poor here, which it is. It might not be a direct war on the poor, particularly here, but the priorities of where we're spending our money speaks for itself. Thomas Jefferson. He said that it is in our lives, he was kind of a Unitarian, it is in our lives and not our words that our religion must be read. In the same spirit, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who preached from this very pulpit, said, "The gospel you live speaks so loudly, I cannot hear what you are saying." Very cool. What are we as a nation telling the world about us? The terrorists ought to think about their behavior and what it tells about them, and so ought we. Religiously, we inherit a morality that trains us to be more focused on personal behavior. The Christian Judeo story worries us about ourself, our souls, who we sleep with, things we do. But we've lost some of that collective morality. We've compartmentalized our morality and individual behavior, and we turn away from the collective responsibility because it's confusing. I'll repeat my earlier call for respect. It requires a great bit of courage and loyalty to put oneself in harm's way for one's country. However, as much as we praise the courage to fight, we must resist the systems that exist that divide us from our collective human oneness, and war and big military expenses are right there. Amen. Sorry to bring you down. In a contrasting theme and style, our offertory humor. 3 friends decided to go hunting together. One was a lawyer, one was a doctor, the other was a preacher. They were walking along, there was a big buck appeared, and the 3 of them all turned and shot at the same time. The buck dropped immediately. The hunting party rushed to see this big buck, and upon reaching the fallen deer, they found out that it was dead, but that it only had 1 bullet hole. The debate about who actually shot the big deer was on until a game warden came by and he offered to help. And a few moments later, just looking at the buck, he said, "I can say with much confidence that the pastor shot the buck." The friends were amazed. "How could you determine who? We weren't even here." They said, "Well, the game warden said it was easy to figure out who delivered the blow. The bullet went in, out one ear and out the other." Give generously for the life and work of our church. Please join me in our extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.